welcome to the job, Paul. There's two things you need to know. The first thing is we've got 2 days' money in the bank. And the second thing is I'm leaving.
And a trustee whispers in my ear, that has Paul Farmer written all over it.
The first thing that happened to me when I went to school was they didn't have any room in the year that I was supposed to be going in, so they put me in the year above.
You've got to sort of step up.
How do you become resilient, and also how do you show up?
What are those tough decisions that you had to make in that role at Mind that were most significant in driving that trajectory?
We realised at that point that we were onto something.
People want you to do everything for everyone.
I've got to think really differently about how I show up as a leader.
I'm just curious about your ability to partition.
This is where we get into my two favourite subjects.
Sarah Hughes, who's the current CEO of Mind,
who you've had on here, this, yeah?
Yeah, was talking about something she views as a bit of an unspoken crisis.
I think Sarah is absolutely right to warn of this challenge.
This is classic, isn't it?
Consultants have come and looked at federated networks and kind of run away screaming. In the context of Age UK, that also includes the work we do internationally, where we are also a part of another federation.
Paul, thank you so much for doing an episode of Causes.
Hi Dave, really nice to see you again.
So I want you to picture the scene for a second. I'm at a board meeting presenting an Age UK brand refresh, and a trustee whispers in my ear, that has Paul Farmer written all over it. What do you think they mean? What would you say are the hallmark characteristics of Paul Farmer? That's a true story, by the way.
So I suppose my job, I've always seen my job as being an enabling leader, somebody who tries to bring out the very best of the people that we're working for and with, the people who are engaged in the organisation, and also somebody who thinks about the role that we play as charities, voluntary sector organisations, particularly in connection to the cause that we're all about. So to me, it's about cause first. It always has been, whether it's the work I did in mental health or now thinking about older people and later life, because good or large though many organisations are, none of what we want to do is going to be achieved on our own. First of all, so we need to be clear about what our role is within that cause. But secondly, part of our jobs is to try to set that bigger direction of for and with that cause. And so, very much what we're trying to do with Let's Change How We Age, which is Age UK's new strapline, is to really do as it says on the tin, change the way that we think about age and ageing, and think about age as a cause.
Fantastic. Well, we'll come on to the sort of age and mental health stuff in a second. But just give us for people who don't know who you are, give us a 1-minute intro from sort of childhood to now. So that's quite a long time ago now, I'm afraid, I have to say. Had a very kind of interesting life as a child. Went to the first thing that happened to me when I went to school was they didn't have any room in the year that I was supposed to be going in, so they put me in the year above. So that meant I stayed in that year for the entirety of my school career. So I ended up always being the youngest in that group. So there's something about how you feel about that in that context. After university, like lots of people, I had no idea what I wanted to do, so I went travelling. That's exactly what you should do, I think. And when I came back, I fell into a job working for a tiny charity called the Clerkenwell Heritage Centre in central London, whose job was try to promote Clerkenwell as a destination. 2 members of staff. So I was the guy who was my boss was the director. So therefore, by definition, I was the assistant director. There wasn't anybody else in the organisation. Learnt loads, and then luckily got a job at Samaritans, which was really what I think of as my formal start, if you like, in the charity and voluntary sector. So I was their press officer.
then communications manager, and I worked in that space for Samaritans and then for Rethink Mental Illness, where I was Director of Public Affairs. Then I went to Mind as Chief Exec, and here I am at Age UK.
Let's just drill into that year above thing for a second, because I didn't know that. I mean, if you're in school age and you're sort of put in with the year above you, presumably, they're a lot further along in the curriculum, and you've got to sort of catch up or keep up. Can you talk to me about? Do you think there's a sort of influence that has had on, being in rooms that you've got to sort of step up?
Yeah, I think I have got two reflections about it. One was, I think it helped me to understand that you have to believe in yourself, because actually you were the outlier in this space, and when you're a year younger than everybody else, it's not just about the work, it's about you as a person and how you're developing and all of that. And I actually also, I think, had a very, quite a deep experience about what it means to be excluded, to be, not part of the kind of group, the core gang, if you like. So I was a bit of an outsider, I think, partly because I was younger, and not sure I necessarily had the emotional maturity to be able to cope with some of the things that were happening. So I think it did quite a deep level. It did have an impact on what on the way I kind of then turned up later. But I do, and also, of course, interestingly, given the job I do now, I reflect on it in the context of age and how do you think about your aging and the way you age, right the way from that kind of those very young years as well. So yeah, I think it's had an impact on me, but probably most of all, it's helped me to think about how do you become resilient, and also how do you show up when you're in a slightly different environment. And a lot of my work has always been to turn up in places where I'm not expected.
Amazing. So you talked about the Heritage Centre. It was a 2-person charity. You're doing all sorts there. What do you think that taught you, looking back?
I think it gave me, the great thing about working in small charities, and, we have lots of smaller charities in the Age UK network, and I think small charities are super important in the whole kind of structure of our sector. And inside a small charity, you learn everything. I learned how to do double entry bookkeeping. I learned how to do fundraising. We had to produce a restaurant guide leaflet. So I used to go to the restaurants and get them to give us money to sponsor the leaflet. Had to support my boss in terms of the work that was going on with the council that were quite tricky as a funder, but were the only major funder of this. We took older people who lived in Clerkenwell on coach trips to historic sites of historical interest connected with the area. You just learn about everything, and in those kinds of environments, that is it's really exciting, and it's quite. I think it's really invigorating as you're starting out on the world of work, that you're learning lots of new skills, and you're also testing yourself. Can you do these kinds of things? Can you stand up in front of a coach of older people and start talking to them about the 16th century connection between Woodbridge in Suffolk and Woodbridge Street in Clerkenwell and these kinds of things? Can you do that? Is that, can you actually, and you're only going to find out by trying, aren't you? So I think you have the most incredible opportunity to test things out, try things out, and you learn a lot about yourself. You learn about what you're good at, and you also learn about what you're not very good at. Wasn't very good at double entry bookkeeping.
Coming through to now, you've led Mind, you're leading Age UK. The size and the scale and the impact of the organisations that you're having on the sort of nation and internationally as well in the Age UK group is not a 2-person organisation like the Heritage Centre was. So sure. So what are those? If it's easier to look back on these moments, isn't it? What are those sort of key moments throughout your career, from in between that gap, that have sort of aided you to get to where you are? Can you sort of pinpoint a few key moments that with like, you know, this conversation or this role or something? Like, what are the key bits that have got you to leading, you know, massive organisations?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think it's only when you look back and you think, here are some things that happened and they were important. So I'll give you two or three things, two or three reflections. I suppose first of all, the people around me, the bosses I've had, the people I've worked with, the peer group, are really, really influential. And so different conversations with various chief executives in different organisations have always played an important role in terms of thinking about how you're going to learn and fast. I remember going to, when I arrived at what was then the National Schizophrenia Fellowship, the chief executive at the time, who was a very, very nice man and is a good friend of mine now, said, welcome to the job, Paul. There's two things you need to know. The first thing is we've got 2 days' money in the bank. And the second thing is I'm leaving. So that's one of those moments when you kind of go, okay, have I made the right choice here? What am I going to do? But actually, what you then learn in that kind of space, that kind of environment in an organisation, which was a really great organisation doing fantastic work, needed support to get itself into the right place, was a kind of that's a real moment when you're learning that kind of capability to be able to work with others, work with a peer group, work with the people in the organisation, and still keep your eye on the cause. So that's kind of one moment, if you like. At Mind, I think there were two kind of points where you start to learn about, where you're learning about the nature of being a leader. So it was my first chief exec job at Mind. I've never been a chief exec before. And I think there were two moments there where you realise that, you know, you had to keep on. You're always stretching yourself. I suppose that's right at the heart of what I do. Is constantly trying to look at new things, new ideas. How do we stretch and push and develop and grow? And at Mind, we grew quite fast as an organisation. And when I started at Mind, I used to spend half an hour with every single new member of staff. And that's because there were only about 100 staff in the organisation. So, you know, that was doable. By the time we got to 200 staff, that wasn't possible anymore. And so that made me think, oh, hang on, I've got to think really differently about how I show up as a leader to in a bigger organisation. And this was already the case, of course, because Mind is a federated network. So you're thinking about how you adjust your leadership approach, which is still authentic to who you are as a person, but actually recognises that the world that you're operating in requires you to be slightly different. And then I think the third event was when is part of the big Time to Change campaign, which was a kind of really groundbreaking mental health collaborative campaign that was run by Mind, but with lots of other charity partners. And in amongst all of that, one Halloween, ASDA had put in place a Halloween costume, which was called Mental Patient, which was available online for £7.99 or something like that. You could buy for £2.99 an additional blood-stained knife. And as part of the Time to Change campaign, we'd started to build a network of mental health campaigners. And when this was spotted by our campaigners and drew to the attention of what was in those days, what was in the relatively early days, but the very kind of quite exciting days of what was then known as Twitter, the kind of campaigners rose up, the celebrities piled in, and 2 hours later that product was withdrawn. And we realised at that point that we were onto something. Something was changing in the kind of, whatever you want to call it, the public mood, the kind of response to people's responses to mental health, because the chances are that ASDA had sold a costume like that every year previously. and nobody had complained about it, or very few people had, or whatever. So the kind of that moment in time was one of those moments when you think, as a leader, well, first of all, we're onto something. Isn't this fantastic? We're onto something. This cause is beginning to, the super tanker of a cause is beginning to turn. But also then thinks, well, okay, what does that open the door to? What does that open the door to being able to do in other ways, building on that kind of momentum that you have, and seeing that opportunity to encourage other people to be a part of that bigger movement, I think was a really big learning.
So you sort of referenced earlier the sort of growth of Mind whilst you were there. So from the research I did, it was during your tenure, Mind went from 18 to 70 million income, 100 to 500 staff. So this is like, you're 5xing the staff team. Don't know what the X is of the money. Similar questions to the one before around, can you look back and pinpoint what are those tough decisions that you had to make in that role at Mind that were most significant in driving that trajectory?
Yeah, I think this is where we get into my two favourite subjects, which is basically about strategy and kind of governance and leadership, if you like. And in this time I was at Mind, I was lucky to do a series of cycles of strategy, and in each strategic, and you look back on this obviously with hindsight. So I don't think we necessarily thought this at the time, but with hindsight, you could see how each strategic phase had achievable, heavy ambition, but ambition that collectively people felt was achievable. So in the context of the cause, in the context of the areas that we wanted to work in the context of the organisation, kind of each of those phases. So I was there for 16 years, so effectively I did three 5-year strategies, more or less, with brilliant leaders and trustees, and always having the voice of lived experience in the room. And in all charities, I think that voice of lived experience is really, really important. So each of those, I think, builds your picture, and I think that also demands you to think about what you're not going to do and what you're not going to prioritise, because when you are operating in a cause space, everybody thinks you're going to be everybody to all people, and you just can't do that. It's just not. It's not feasible. Now you want to keep your waterfront as wide as broad as you possibly can, whilst at the same time recognising you can't do everything. So, very good example in the work we did in Mind was that we chose very consciously not to play any role in the area of medical research, and we could have done that because there wasn't, certainly in the early days, a charity that was doing that work. We could have looked into it, and of course, understanding of mental health is very limited, so it would be a very legitimate area to explore. We chose not to do that. We said we're going to stick with, broadly speaking, saying we're here for people experiencing mental health problems right here, right now, and we're going to get alongside you and support you, and that's our job. So I think doing that is really important, and connected to that is the kind of governance and leadership to make that happen, and also connected to that is the kind of, this is back to the comms piece, which is the relationship that you have between your strategy and your brand. Because your strategy and your brand need to be as aligned as they possibly can. And that's not always possible because, just because of the timing or the resources or whatever, but trying to get as close as you possibly can to making sure that your brand and your strategy is as closely aligned as possible, then you've got the best possible chance of kind of galvanizing your activity into the right places. And that's something we did at Mind, and certainly at Age UK with Let's Change How We Age. Is all about how we think about how we're encouraging people to really think about that kind of changing environment of aging.
There's a couple of bits there. One is there is one of the things I want to ask you is the sort of people with lived experience piece, but before that, this is classic, isn't it? It's like people want you to do everything for everyone, sort of thing. So how, I guess, in practical terms, like how are you deciding what not to do? I mean, you've sort of touched on it there, but also how are you communicating with people that is not what we're going to do, this is what we're going to do? Sort of, what I'm getting at here is your ability to say no and how that's developed.
Yeah, I'm terrible at that, but I think you within a frame, I think you can be quite clear about the place that you're trying to get to, and therefore, by definition, what that requires you to really focus on. And I think I think this is where also you have to understand your ecosystem, we're talking. This is a kind of causes conversation, and each kind of cause has its own ecosystem of players. So I think I'm a very strong believer in thinking about what's that world look like that you're operating in, and where does it make sense for you as an organisation to dial up, and where does it make sense for you to dial down, because there are other organisations who are doing that work really well. You just let them get on with it. We need to think about the organisations that are in that space and create the environment for the best possible collaborative working environment for those organisations to work together on. And of course, the ultimate example of that is our federations, our local networks, where we have local minds, we have local eduques, where we're recognising that those organisations, they know about the communities that they're operating in way better than I could ever understand. So we need to give them the space, the autonomy, which is why I'm a big fan of federated networks, to be able to operate in response to their own the needs of the people in their area, but also to be able to be a part of a group that are trying to achieve that culture and cause change by seeing the alignment of the brand and the strategy and the overall direction of travel. So it is quite a complicated ecosystem, but it's one that, as a leader, you are the sort of conductor of the orchestra to some extent. You're the kind of person who's trying to bring different parts into the space, but you're also there's also a part of you playing a role of, to some extent, creating and supporting the momentum for change. Sometimes especially when things get tricky.
Let's talk about ecosystem. So I was going to ask you about this sort of further on, but it's a good segue. The sort of federation piece of this, and the Age UK group. Let's just talk about the Age UK group in this setting, but Mind, I'm sure, is similar. You were a big champion of this local, national, international sort of wording, which we utilised in many ways when I was at the Age UK group. But there's a lot going on. There's 130 plus local Age UKs. You have national work across all corners of the UK. You have international work via Age International. There's a lot of moving parts, a lot of people trying to have impact for older people. What are the biggest challenges in a structure like that? Like, what are the differences between that model versus leading an organisation that doesn't have this federated or group component to it? And another question is, like, sort of personal question for you is, how do you partition and work across so many areas effectively when there must always be like a red flashing light happening in some of those areas?
So, first of all, I'm a big fan of federated movements. I think they've got an awful lot going for them. I think they combine, at their best, the best of a strong, effective national charity and the best of local organisations that, as I said, are in touch with their communities and know the right solutions for their communities, and that in the context of Age UK, that also includes the work we do internationally, where we are also a part of another federation, the Help Age Network. So I'm a fan of that. It's not to say that it's not without its challenges. Quite often, consultants have come and looked at federated networks and kind of run away screaming, kind of without really kind of going, "Why on earth are you doing it like this?" But I think it is inherently honest, and I think it's at its best, it's very powerful. At its worst, it's dysfunctional. But at its best, it can be really, really, really powerful. What does that need? What are the ingredients that you need to make that work? So I do think a shared direction of travel is really important.
I think secondly, it is about building and investing in relationships. So I've been to pretty much, I'm well up to about 2/3 of the local Age UK network in terms of visited them. I've got on the train and gone up and down the country, visiting as many as I possibly can. Haven't quite got to everywhere yet, but definitely plan to. And I think that's really important because it is about investing in the relationships. And we've just got a new agreement with our local partners, which I think is really further embedding that sense of shared commitment and building those relationships. And then I think the third space is to be able to have the room to be able to talk about direction of travel and to create that sense of people being invested and a part of a movement. And that's, in some ways, sometimes that's the hardest thing to do, because for all kinds of different reasons, and especially at the moment when the external environment is so tough and so pressured for organisations, local, national, and international, actually, for different reasons. How do we make sure that creating that environment where we are absolutely working in a space where we're kind of in this together, and the solutions that we're going to find are things that we're going to do together, as well as recognising that different communities have different needs, so we need to give people enough room to be able to operate in a really effective way locally. So and we don't have we have the say over that. So it's a collective exercise in making sure we get that balance right, and you're constantly kind of calibrating that. That's not you don't think, oh, that's great, we'll just let that go now. It's a constant calibration exercise, I think, and it's incredibly rewarding, because you start to see the difference in terms of what you do, what we're doing together, how we're able to operate together and bring the best out of that truly local, truly national, truly international kind of sets of relationships.
Yeah, fantastic. So, but what about I'm just curious about your ability to partition. Like, how good are you at
segmenting?
If there's something very stressful happening and then you have a conversation, if you were having this conversation after coming from a very difficult one, how good are you at sort of not thinking about that in the moment? Yeah. And do you have any tactics to be able to do that?
So I think as a chief exec, you have to decide where do you allocate your time. You don't have enough. None of us have enough time. So I just kind of, people say to you, how do you spend your time? And I quite often say 50% on the national charity internally, 50% on the external environment, and 50% in the network. So that's how I spend my time. And part of that is because, it's partly just to reflect on the fact that there isn't enough time in the day really to do all of those things. I think it's really important to have a great team around you. You cannot be across everything. Your job is to, as I said, my job is to some extent, create the environment for people to thrive at their very best. And I've got a great team here at Age UK, and I absolutely love working with them. And I think that really matters. So when you're running a larger organisation, the last thing you want is for your chief executive to be a micromanager. That's not what we're here for. We're here to be the strategic leaders of the organisation, set the direction of travel, set the tone, set the pace. When challenges come along, as they inevitably do, I think I'm there to resolve issues. I'm there to solve issues, but I'm mainly there to listen and to try to give people the space to be able to come up with the right environment, the right decisions to make. And I think that's I think creating the right environment for those things to be addressed is really key. When I was at Mind, our children were young, and they were absolutely fantastic at bringing you completely down to earth. So you get home, and you might have had the most stressful day in the world, as far as you were concerned. But if you weren't prepared to go and play football in the garden or something,
they weren't interested. Quite rightly, they weren't interested. So those kinds of spaces to go to be able to de-stress, I think, are hugely important. And as you would imagine, I'm a huge champion of looking after your mental health in this space. And I think having the room and the space to be able to decompress, to reflect, to kind of rebuild sometimes. I think that's really, really important, and you learn a lot about yourself when you're put into those very stressful and difficult situations, or how you're what you need to counterbalance those things.
Sarah Hughes, who's the current CEO of Mind,
you've had on here this,
was talking about a something she views as a bit of an unspoken crisis, which is this CEO burnout at the moment, given the context of funding challenges and all of that stuff. So how big of an issue do you feel like that is? How do you approach that, sort of avoiding that? I guess both you and her come at this not only from being in the role, but also having the mental health expertise too.
Yeah. So first of all, I mean, yes, these are difficult and stressful jobs in any sector, to be honest, I think. And in the voluntary sector, you just have a different set of conditions that you're operating in. So I think there is an issue that we have to pay attention to. So therefore, the first thing that we have to think about is how do we equip leaders to look after and manage their mental health, because that's not just in the interests of the leaders, that's in the interests of the whole organisation. So how do you make that space for that to happen, and make that a priority? So I think there are a few. The answers are always quite straightforward, but they're often things you don't do. So, for example, taking holidays. People don't. Lots of chief execs don't take proper holidays. I've always done that. Having a really good peer group, I think, is important. I can't tell you how much I love this sector in terms of the talent and the capability of people who are working in it at leadership level at the moment. I think it's a fantastic bunch of people who do great work, and the peer support that you get from that group is really important. So I've, for a while, convened a group of federated chief execs. We get together from time to time. Somebody described it to me once as half work, half therapy. And we spend time, and during COVID, for example, that group was really important to having a place where you could go and talk out the things that you needed to talk about. And I think all chief execs should have that kind of peer group, and organisations like Akivo really help that to happen. So it's really, really important, and I think we need to build that. And then I think the other environmental pieces are a good relationship with your board, the right balance of support and challenge, and a good relationship with your own team. So those are key, but they all need working out. And I think Sarah is absolutely right to warn of this challenge, because the jobs are, I think the jobs, they don't get any easier. Every single year there seems to be some curveball that is thrown at you, whether it was COVID or the cost of living crisis or increases in national insurance and whatever it might be, that means you have to think about what you're doing. And I think particularly for organisations that are in this cause space, the headwinds have become harder. So making change is harder, and often making change is the energy drink that you take because it's your fuel for going on and doing other things. Just if you feel like you're not really making much progress, then that can be really frustrating and pull you down. So we were given a couple of bottles of Lucozade by the government with the change in winter fuel payment, because we were, that was a campaign that we weren't sure we were going to win. But when you do win those kinds of campaigns, then that gives you
it gives you energy, it gives you fuel, it gives you the view that, yeah, actually you can, we can make change even though the environment is difficult. And I think that helps others as well to see that change is possible even though the environment is really tough at the moment for people. Because that's what, fundamentally, I think that's what drives, I mean, all the great chief execs in our sector are driven by that way more than they are driven by, the size of the organisation or, the amount of money they've raised.
All right, quick fire round. So these are what we're looking for is tight,
Yeah,
campaigny answers. What's good leadership to you?
Honest, authentic, listening, enabling.
Why is it important to responsibly tell the stories of people with lived experience?
It is the DNA of our charity to tell the stories of people who have their experiences openly and honestly. To do anything else would be dishonest and disingenuous.
Fantastic. So if you look around, there's rising needs, there's funding squeezes, there's conflicts, there's climate change. It's quite easy to feel deflated. What gives you hope for society and progress?
I love the the energy of younger people. I have children in their 20s. We have a fantastic younger workers group here at Age UK who have great energy and passion. So that gives me hope. And inherently, I believe that despite all the chaos that is out there at the moment, that we are fundamentally kind to each other.
Fantastic. That's it. But the last bit, I want to sort of leave everybody the opportunity to sort of, have an open space to talk to this audience if there's anything that's on your mind that we haven't talked about already.
Well, I think that just to summarise, I think it's been a great conversation, Dave. I've really enjoyed it. I suppose my summary for this conversation is for me, how do we harness this extraordinary capability that we have as a sector, small, medium and large charities, people who care passionately about causes, wanting to make a difference. There is no shortage of change that is needed in our society, and the more we work and learn together, the greater the chance that we can achieve some of those changes. And this sector is really important and importantly placed to be a driving force for some of that change. And I think we should believe that and we should act on it.